Yeah, there you go. There's an American voice that comes in. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know if she's a member or not. So what's happened
It's
to
not me.
Jennifer and Tao? Ask to unmute, and then hiya. Can we hear you? Can you speak up? You there?
It's muted at the minute.
Are you muted? Anyway, and then Jenny's there as well. So I don't know. We're waiting for. Shall we wait a few minutes and see who joins?
Yeah. Okay. Should we just say a little bit about how we, just for people who've just joined, Justin's going to give a little bit of an introduction to his book, and then I've been lucky enough to have a chance to read it before publication. So I've got a load of questions lined up for him, and hoping that the questions will, without giving away the plot, intrigue you and give you more insight into what he's encompassed in this book, which is the first of a two-part series. So I'm looking forward to reading the second one and seeing what happens next.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for saying that, Debbie. The second one's I'm actually editing at the moment, or trying to, as well as promoting this one. In fact, the book actually arrived today, the actual paperback. So I picked it up at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. So I was very pleased to get that underway. And I think we've got another Jenny joining in a minute. But she's also asked to unmute. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're going to run for maximum an hour, unless you've got some questions. Hey, and look, this is not. I was saying to Debbie, this is not a sales pitch. This is really just for me to say thank you to all the folks who have helped me along the way, and to sort of share this moment. So I think everybody wins. I think it's the current saying, isn't it? Isn't it?
Absolutely, win-win.
Hey, and Jackie, maybe at the end you can tell folks about your festival if you want to. Yeah. Hi, Jenny. Hi. So yeah, Debbie's kindly got some good questions for me. She's read the book, so I think that really makes a big difference to the sort of the depth the questions can be asked. And look, thanks very much for joining us in parking lots and everything. So there you go. Am I meant to say anything else now?
Well, should we kick off then? Do you want to hold up the oh, we've got Emma joining on her iPhone. Hello, Emma.
Yeah, Emma's joining. Oh, we've got a clock as well. Oh no, it's Jenny's come back. So welcome everybody.
Oh,
hi. Hi, Emma. Welcome. What does not joined mean? Oh, you're the guest. That's right. Okay. So do you want to kick off then,
yeah,
Debbie, and let's get going.
Let's go for it. Do you want to start by holding the cover of the book up so people can start to pick up the excitement and adventure of this ocean-going book? Most of it is ocean-going. And we'll talk a little bit about more about that in a minute. And we'll also be talking about the title, to explain the intriguing title, about the mark of the salamander and just what that means. Because I have to say, when Justin was first telling me about it, I thought, what is this salamander? Where's the salamander come in? So we'll find out all about that. So basically, pinched slightly from your blurb, Justin, on Amazon. Neil, am I saying this right? Neelan, is that how you say his name?
Yeah, that's right. Neelan, I think so.
Right. Neelan Michaels is a young Flemish man fleeing religious persecution in the Spanish Netherlands. He settles in Mortlake, near London, and is a pupil at Westminster School, being taught by the Queen's astrologer, and he has a bright future ahead of him until he is falsely accused of murder and has to turn fugitive and leave that life behind in order to survive. after working as a blacksmith's apprentice in London, a really, really atmospheric bit. You'll feel that you are there in Elizabethan London with all its perils and excitement. And he becomes engaged to a local girl. He is press ganged into the crew of the Golden Hind, joining Sir Francis Drake on his first circumnavigation of the globe. So this is where you climb on board this exciting ship on the cover, beautiful cover picture there, and it's the historical adventure is given added interest by Newland's possession of kind of mystical powers, which include a certain affinity for fire, which is to do with the mark of the salamander in the title. The story tells both of Newland's coming of age, because he's about 17, is he, Justin, at the outset?
Yeah, 17, 18 at the
17,
time.
18, so close to adulthood, still at school, close to adulthood. And also it's the coming age of England under Queen Elizabeth I and the beginnings of the English Empire. It's an age after all the disruptions of Henry VIII's reign and all that period of history. It seems in many ways a much more peaceful time in some respects, and a safer time in some regards, and which fosters in an era of real cultural and scientific advances. And you're on top of all of these, Justin, in the story. Which of the advances and interests feature in your novel, and how do they affect the plot?
It was a very sort of revolutionary time, I think. So I particularly chose that period of history to tell England's coming of age. And I found in the other novels I've written that that's effectively what I was trying to do with other countries, with other nations, with other sort of civilizations, trying to find sort of turning moments when they were different afterward than they were before. It's a bit like we all have personal experiences, saying growing up, which changes, and I suppose I was trying to find that moment in England's history when it changed and wasn't ever the same again.
Yes, that voyage of the Golden Hind is completely pivotal, isn't it? It's
It is,
transformed.
and the more I researched it, the more I realised how pivotal it was, because, and perhaps we'll go into it in a bit more detail. But some of the, in answer to your question, some of the advances that were being made at the time were in shipbuilding. The English had developed faster ships with their oaken hulls and masts, and in response to these sort of huge galleons that the Spanish had built and sailed around the world, literally, because Magellan had already done it. The Portuguese fellow. And that they deliberately built smaller ships so that they could maneuver quicker around the bigger galleons of the Spanish, and that was basically their tactic.
Oh, that's interesting.
Later in the Armada, which makes sort of culminates my second novel, and so things like the ability to use astrolabes and some of the other navigational equipment were also advanced, which of course, without some basic understanding of, where the hell they were on the globe, you just couldn't sail anywhere. So they were some of the things. And I think, all this was in the background of the wars between Spain, Catholic Spain, and Protestant England and the Netherlands, which was also going on at the time, which features in the stories.
Yes, it's real turmoil in Europe, isn't there? And I guess Newland is kind of a microcosm of that, in that he started out in Sangatte and then flees to the Netherlands, and then with his father, because his mother has been killed, then has to flee the Netherlands to London as well. And he's still not safe, even in the more sort of libertarian London. So although you've got lots of scientific advances in there, like the navigational advances and the shipbuilding, that's fascinating. I didn't realise that our ships were faster and nippier and designed for that purpose. That's very interesting. But people were also still very superstitious. So science was advancing, but there was still a lot of superstition and myth. And you've woven that into your story as well, both at land and sea. The medieval belief in the four elements, for example, has a huge impact on Newland's life, in particular fire. And you write, fire features quite often in the novel in different ways. And it made me think about it. The way you wrote about it made me think about it in different ways. I love that Newland says it's the one element that you can't hold of earth, wind, air and fire. You can't hold fire, and it's both the creator and a destroyer of life. It causes lots of pivotal moments in the story. Can you explain Newland's special relationship with fire and how that ties in with the title of the novel?
I'll try. I mean, clearly, you can tell that I had a fascination with fire, and that's why I wrote about it. And I think one of the things I've realised in writing fiction, and of course including history in it, is that the first reader of what an author has written is the author. Okay, so I often find things out that I didn't really know that I thought about what I thought as I write, and I'm sure every writer's had that experience. So in a way, I'm exploring what fire is for myself first of all. And whilst and of course, if it's entertaining to me, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be entertaining to you guys. Do you know what I mean? People come up to me sometimes and say, what should I write about? And I say to them, well, find out whatever you're passionate about and write about it.
Absolutely.
Reason being that if you're writing about something that makes you bored, then somebody reading it, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get bored. So it transmits into the words, into the flavors, into the language, the words you choose, the sentence structure, everything can become, I suppose, funny enough, I sent that book to a lady who had helped me with the Spanish translation, because there's a few Spanish phrases in the book. And I asked her to review the book and give me feedback on it before, to edit it so I could improve the structure and things. So she came back and said, look, I actually don't like the book. The sentences are too short. And I thought, what? But they are short. And now I come to think about it, maybe that is part of, something fiery. Has a short nature, short-lived, short, fire, quick.
It makes it pacey as
well. You know
well.
what I mean? So you have to reflect what you're writing about. Otherwise, you're not writing about it.
Yeah. Can you explain what the mark of the salamander actually is? Because it is a physical mark that gives him specific powers, isn't it? Do you want to
Yeah, it is. I mean, back in my day, I've looked at all these arts like the tarot and palmistry and stuff like that. So I've always been fascinated with these kinds of devices, if you like. So I conceived this idea of 3 wavy lines underneath the guy's index finger.
So just here.
Middle finger, sorry. Middle finger. Which is actually called his Saturn finger. I didn't actually reference that, but that's what it's called in palmistry. And the wavy lines, of course, is to give an idea of that's what fire looks like. It's quick and it's fast and it's moving, it's mobile. So that was just a very simple generic idea. What I called the mark of the salamander. And of course, he develops a relationship with this mark because he uses it as a device to help him see things in the future and see things at distance, and give him particular powers, which again I explore in the novel without giving too much away.
Yes. There's the story plays constantly with the contrast of safety and danger, and in one way, Newland can control fire, and extinguish it, and you can also light it and ignite it, which is pretty useful power in the days before matches and cigarette lighters and things. But you're playing constantly with the contrast of safety and danger, both at home, because Elizabethan London was a pretty dangerous place, and also at sea. How safe could anyone be, not least Newland, in the Elizabethan era, whether they're in the crowded, busy, vibrant, packed centre of London, teeming with infection and fire hazards and all sorts, or equally on board an English ship where fire is also a terrible danger? I mean, any sailor is going to fear fire if you're out on a ship, sailing around the world into the unknown. Can anyone ever be really safe, or has there got to be always danger for an Elizabethan?
There has, yeah. I mean, you mentioned the ship, and of course the ship's made of wood. And you mentioned the City of London, and of course all the houses are made of wood. So, I found this picture of a watchman, which and the watchman sort of feature in the story, and he becomes a kind of watchman for a little while, Newland. And there's this picture of a watchman. He's kind of got a lantern in one hand, a pike in the other, and a bell, with a dog behind him to sort of help him out. And the pike is obviously to, ward off the rapscallions and that. The lantern is obviously for helping see at night, because there's no street lighting, as you can imagine. The bell is if there's a fire. Ding, 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 ding. Get out of your houses quick. So, already in those days, they were preparing, sentinels, if you like, to help folks out in times of fire. It was very dangerous, and of course, equally so on the battleships, because they got gunpowder. And of course, they have to use fire to light the cannon, to fire the gunpowder off. So very dangerous.
Yeah, it's only ever relative, really, isn't it? He thinks he's safe at certain points, but there always seems to be more dangers around the corner.
Just to say, the guy. I mean, I looked up the names of the crew of the Golden Hind and the other 4 ships that sailed with Drake, and there was a character called Nellie, Nele, who was a Flemish immigrant. But I kind of thought Nellie is a bit sassy, so I changed his name to Newland. And the other curio was, and this is what also gave me the idea for another character who occurs in the novel, there was a Danish gunner, a master gunner called Nelly. He had the same name. So they called him Great Newland, Great Nelly, because he was a big guy, Danish guy. See? And they called, when they were on the ship together, and they called Nelly, Newland, who I called in the novel, I called him Little Nelly, because he was little. And again, there's reasons for why he was little, which are explored in the story. But just to say that, so I kind of fictionalized those characters. They were real people. And a number of the other characters in the story, like Fletcher, the chaplain, Thomas Doughty, the mutineer, and all these other guys, and even Diego, the Cimarron, who was a runaway slave who joined Drake in the Isthmus of Panama and became his manservant.
Because Drake features a lot in the book, doesn't he? You have conversations.
Yeah, he does.
He's the leader. So it's interesting weaving together the fictitious people with the real people. You never quite know when the fact stops and the fiction begins.
Well, that's exactly what I try and exploit, if you like, by basing a lot of the story on fact or fact. that draws people in. So when I introduce some of the sort of more esoteric ideas or clairvoyance and dreams and visions and things like this, they're thinking, is that what's happening? Or, I just want to introduce that element of doubt. And so that's how I try and achieve it.
Yes, and it's well done. Now, several times while I was reading the story, I thought, well, this would be a really interesting book club read, because there seem to be quite a lot of parallels with the 21st century. There's lots of opportunities to sort of compare and contrast attitudes and events. And one of the things that really made me sit up was when you revealed that Newland comes from Sangatte in France, which is a place that we now it's in the newspapers all the time because of the refugee camp there for people fleeing from as political refugees or economic refugees or whatever, waiting to come to England now. And I wondered whether you'd purposely chosen to have a Flemish refugee as your central character to make it to give it more of a parallel with the 21st century, or whether that's a coincidence. And a religious refugee, to what extent do you think that will make his experiences resonate more with modern readers, and was that your intention?
I chose Sangatte because I don't really want to give too much of the plot away, because it comes up in the second novel. Basically, Sangatte in those days was in a place called Picardy, which is what we call northern France or whatever. But it just happens to be about 5 miles south of a place called Calais. Now, just to cut a long story short, the reason I chose it was because I wanted it to be near Calais, because the denouement, or the final unfolding and culmination of the Battle of Gravelines started at Calais. The Spanish Armada anchored off Calais once they traversed the southern coast of England, and the English anchored just south of Calais, just off a little village called Sangatte.
Oh.
So I wanted him to come home.
Oh, right. Because England actually owned parts of northern France for a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Calais they'd only just lost Calais, I think, a few decades before. I mean, they'd had it since Agincourt, those days. So they had it for, say, 200 years.
Yeah.
But I realise we're skipping through some of these things. Of course, there's a lot to cover. I haven't really gone into the superstitions, which you asked about a minute ago, which is another fascinating subject to go into. And then also the religious aspect of his beliefs, the Protestantism. And I want to research some of that. And I mean, it's just, history is so weird. I mean, one of the features in the story is that he ends up near a place called Smithfield, which folks may know or may not know. Back in the day, was used to basically execute heretics. So he happens to be passing there, doing whatever he's doing, and he finds out that the people being executed are Protestants. So you think, well, what the hell is going on? Because it's a Protestant land, but it turns out that they are Baptists. They are Dutch Baptists, and they had a particular belief in baptism and the when baptism should arise. They basically believed that a child could not be baptized without its permission. In other words, they had to be 16 or 18 or 20. They had to come of age in order to decide if they wanted to be baptized. That, at the time, was seriously heretical, and got these. In fact, Elizabeth didn't want to execute them. She said, "You go home, bugger off home, go back to the Netherlands." But 2 people refused, which is what they did in those days, and so she executed.
Gosh.
And that was the reason. So they were Protestants, but heretical Protestants. So talk about religious beliefs and what it got you. And, why would you do that? Why would you refuse? Clearly they had a different idea about religious belief.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
Different to,
it's quite shocking these days, isn't it? It's shocking to us.
so you just, to highlight some of those stories, which, like you say, play, give a whole contrast and compare to today's world.
Mm,
How
mm.
else do we know where we are today if we can't compare it to something else?
Yeah, I think another interesting concept that makes you think more about today as well is this is at the start of empire, and the English and the Spanish are storming around the world and dominating the populations that they find in the new worlds that they're discovering. And there is a feeling throughout the story among the English characters and the crew on the Golden Hind that the English are supreme, the Spanish are the devil incarnate, and it's very black and white. That the English are the virtual ones, the virtuous ones, and even though
Just to say, the Spanish thought exactly the same, but the opposite.
of course, don't we all
Exactly the same.
yes, yeah, and the English are doing pretty terrible things as well, because although they are berating the Spanish for their practices, after all, Newland was press ganged against his will to join the crew in the first place. So I mean, yeah, there's certain hypocrisy going on there. But I was also struck, and again, this made me think about the modern attitude because in the last few years, there's been such a rebound against the practices of empire and slavery, and there's been so much conversation about that. And at one point, Newland is talking on board ship with his crewmates about slavery, and he is saying that slavery is wrong, everybody's created equal. To Would that be unusual for somebody in those days to believe that?
It could be. It could be. I must admit, that's probably the author's voice more than anything else. But having said that, like the example that's often laid against Drake, he was a slaver.
Mm.
So, but what is he doing hiring a runaway slave to be his manservant?
Yeah, yeah.
But, there are other bits of not so nice things that he did do, which I didn't include in the story. So it's just that was the culture of the time.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we've grown out of some of it, but perhaps not all of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such a potent, contentious issue still today. I mean, as I think I made in my notes to your questions, you can go back to 1300 BC when Ramesses was enslaving the Jews. So
Yeah.
that says
It was
slavery
over
been
us.
around for at least
Yeah.
3,500 years
Yes.
old.
And we still have modern slavery, and it takes
Yeah, and we
from
still have,
four.
it's a practice that's very difficult to eradicate, unfortunately.
Um, the, there's a feeling that empire is inevitable, that Elizabethan England is going to become a great power, which of course it does. Why does Newland, as a Flemish refugee, feel so bound up and so convinced that he has an important part to play in building the empire? What is his motivation for playing a part in building an empire for a country which is not his native country?
Yeah, it's a good question. He early on in the story, he encounters this quite enigmatic figure, real life historical figure called Dr. John Dee,
Mm.
who was the court astrologer to Elizabeth. Lots of courts of Europe, even the Spanish, I think, had astrologers. And as I suggested in the novel, it wasn't just the English who explored some of these occult and esoteric ideas. I mean, he was conjuring angels, right? You can read about it in his books. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Spanish weren't doing something similar. trying to develop their own arts against the English. But early on in the novel, he encounters John Dee. He goes and lives near John Dee in a place called Mortlake, and he becomes his mentor. And he gives him a vision to say, look, you're going to have a big part to play in the unfolding of English history,
Mm.
in the unfolding of these times, and what they represent for the future. So he kind of willingly accepts that and runs with it until he finds out what it all means, because that's obviously the story and the
Yes.
storyline and
Yeah.
the narrative that I want to explore. So
Yeah. Because he's quite an innocent at the beginning, really, isn't he? He's got
mm,
quite a sheltered life, having had that awful background with having to flee from Songat and then from the Netherlands. He's got this really quite nice middle class life, really,
yeah,
as a pupil of Westminster School,
yeah,
and then the rug's pulled from under him. But that shows the power of superstition. That even with all of that disaster behind him, that he would believe in something that seems to us to be a superstition. He would believe in that as defining his calling, and he would
yeah,
follow
yeah,
that instruction. So that shows again the contrast between the scientific beliefs being developed and the lingering superstition that still could be a driving force for the players then. So for Neilan, it's a real coming of age experience from schoolboy to literally man of the world. He has navigated the whole. He's gone around the whole globe. What lessons do you think readers can take away from Neilan's experience? What can they learn?
yeah. Good question. You didn't ask me that one before, though, did you?
Oh, sorry.
You put me on the
Sprung that one on
spot.
you. It
Oh
just
my
occurred to
God.
me when I was putting.
I suppose, perseverance, don't give up, try and understand why things happen to you in the way they do.
Mm, mm.
Because I think
Yeah,
sometimes things happen to you in a way that you don't understand at the time.
yeah, because he's
Certainly,
processing them, isn't he? He's
yeah,
processing these things all the time. He's analysing, philosophizing, really.
yeah. You can two people can go around the world, and one can come back completely the same,
Mm,
and another can come back completely different.
yeah.
Just, just,
Mm. And going around the world, there wasn't any guarantee that you would come back
no, no, there wasn't.
because did you say it was 5 ships started out?
Yeah, some of them were supply ships,
Mm,
but there was, I think, at least two, because one of them turned back,
yeah,
which again is an interesting side story, which I bring
yeah.
into to the novel.
Yes, yeah. All of the detail of the process of the journey adds colour because you bring in all of that. You do make people feel as if they're on board, as if they've got the weather raging around them and the new worlds and things. You travel the world with Neilan. I mean, it's a great read in that respect. Final question. I'm not spoiling the plot, but the story ends with a satisfying resolution for many aspects of Neilan's journey. But you've also set the scene for a sequel, and you've told us just now that you are editing the second book. Can you tell us anything about what happens next without spoiling the plot of the first one?
No, not at all. Yeah, I can. The second novel is called The Midnight of Eights, which I think is a quite extraordinary set of coincidences which yielded that name. I didn't know that's what it was going to be called. And of course, I won't tell you how I came to that. You have to read the novel when it's out. Um, and I think, I spoke to some of you guys about this particular episode in the defeat of the Armada. And I think sometimes in history you come across a set of coincidences which you just think are completely unbelievable
Mm.
how they could have occurred. And yet they did occur. And anyway, that's what gave rise to the title. And the story culminates in I don't actually think the Armada were defeated. I tend to think that they were repulsed
Mm.
because they weren't defeated. They still sailed around the rest of the country, and some of them got home to Spain. So they were repulsed anyway.
Shall we, before we have any questions, should we have a little reading? Have you got a bit
Oh
lined
yeah,
up
okay.
to read? And then if anybody has any questions, if you'd like to put them up in the comments, if you can put them in the comments, if you can access the chat window. If you can't, don't worry, you can just put your hand up afterwards and we'll come round to you. But so if we have a little reading and then some Q&A, that would be fabulous.
Okay, I thought about choosing a reading, but then I thought I'll just open the book and see what comes up. Why not? So this is from chapter 16 called The Light of a Candle. And on each chapter heading, there's a date to give some idea of the dates. 29th of January, 1579. The ocean stretched out in front of them. Newland had noticed that the colour of the waters changed from day to day and even from hour to hour. So why was it not always the same hue, and what made it different? It was a mystery he wanted to solve. During the voyage, he talked to other hands about it and spent hours staring at the waters, the fish, the birds, the clouds, the sky, the wind, and the cat's paws. Cat's paws are the surf, the white surf on the top of waves. In the end, he realized that the variation depended on the speed of the current, the depth of the ocean, the nature of the earth beneath, and the wind speed and direction. Other times it changed according to the moisture in the air, the texture of the light, and the position of the sun in the sky, cloud formation, the lunar cycle, and even the season. That morning off the Chilean island of Santa Maria, the colour of the waters was a glorious, sparkling aquamarine. Drake's pilot took readings from the astrolabe and informed them that they were crossing the Tropic of Capricorn, as you do. Now that the Golden Hind had returned to the torrid realm, the crew hoped that it would bring about a long-awaited change of fortune. The torrid realm is what the ancients used to call the realm between the two tropics. Okay. And I'll leave it there. Just a short little meditation, if you like, on why the colours of the waters change. But in the end, I don't know. I don't know why they changed.
I'm
But
glad
that was my meditation on
it. I'm glad you chose that passage because that was another thing that occurred to me while I was reading it. Was it's so sort of multi-sensory. You know, you got the sense, you got the tastes, you got the sounds. At one point, you say that in the South Atlantic smells more salty than the North does. I thought, wow, this is.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I might have read that.
amazing.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know, it's really interesting. So this is all part of the glorious experience of reading the book. It's not just following Newland's adventure, it's having your own adventure, sailing around the world as well. So thank you, Justin, for the reading. Shall we go on to the questions? We've got the first one from Jenny Minot. Where do you do your initial research? You're obviously a great historian.
Yeah, Jenny, a variety of sources, really. I tend to try to go to the sources, although I haven't said that, I didn't this time. The history is such a room of mirrors. It really is, because you get a historian writing today about the 1500s, and he is seeing the 1500s through the filter of the mentality of a 21st century person. He cannot not, or she cannot not. So cut out the influence and bias that filter introduces. The reason is that you then go to the source. You go to the people writing in the 1500s about what happened in the 1500s. That way you also get to know the mentality of the people in the 1500s and try to get an appreciation of how they thought about what they were doing and the influences in their lives, like the religious influence, the family influence, the social influence, and so on, and how that appeared and the balances in it and how that's different from us today. So I'll go to museums to see artifacts from those days. I visited the Golden Hind in Southwark, where they've got a replica. And you hang about on the boat. I mean, the damn thing's tiny. I mean, it's just like, from one end of the room to the other. I mean, it's just unbelievable that anybody could sail it around the world, let alone, across the channel. It's really, really small.
Yeah.
But then you go through the little doors and the men were smaller. People were smaller. You go to the V&A, the Victoria and Albert, and you see the dresses that the ladies wore, and they're really tiny. They're really quite small.
Just as well.
4 foot, 4'6", something like that. So clearly, they didn't eat as much meat as we do. I mean, the Elizabethans had this. They were trying to promote the fish industry, so they had to eat. It's not just fish on Fridays; they had to eat fish on Wednesdays and Mondays.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right, we've got a great question from Helen. The picture on the wall behind you, Justin, is it the same as the book cover, and which came first?
Yeah, it is the same as the book cover. It's just the book cover
AJ and Jackie having to go
without the titles. So I just like to get one, stick it on the wall.
Yeah, it's a great picture.
Yeah, I mean the publisher had an artist. It's not the usual artist I've used for my other covers, but the publisher insisted they wanted their own artist to work on it. So I had to give them a spec for what to do. And the first draft, they had a ship which a friend of mine complained was from the 1800s. So I got them to change the ship because there'd be somebody saying, "Oh, you can't have that because that's like."
Yeah.
So they got. I don't even know if this is 1480s or 1500s, but it looks a bit older. And there you go.
And the sea and the sky are fabulous. I mean, it
they've done it.
And the danger as well, doesn't it? The risk.
Well, I got them to put the lightning in, I think, and I got them to put the lightning around the salamander, because we were going to have a salamander sort of crawling down the mast, but in the end we decided to make it a little feature of the letter O. I don't know if you probably can't see it, but it's kind of minimised and anyway, that was that.
Next question from Wolf, sorry, I don't know how you say it.
Yeah, hi Jens.
How long has the book been in the making, and how much do you think you've carried from what you've learned from your previous books?
Yeah, I think I do carry I certainly carry a confidence in being able to write, because I suppose in some ways writing you're creating out of nothing, but when you write historical fiction, at least you've got a trace to follow. So I don't know if you know, kind of an analogy I use is that of a radio wave. I don't know if you know that you don't get a single wave in a radio wave. You get what's called a carrier signal, first of all, and then the radio wave actually spirals around it. So the radio, the carrier signal is a bit like, that's the path you've got to follow. You've got to go down that road because in 1580, Drake did this, and in 1588 he did that. So you've got certain fixed points, but then your story spirals around.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
So that's the kind of, and of course, I didn't have that idea or knowledge or awareness when I wrote my first novel. But so you build up skills, you build up confidence, and you build up the way of working. And also I learned from the editors and their comments, and I getting feedback. And I think it really helps, as you probably know, to get other authors and editors to read and comment on your work.
Yeah. We've got another great question from Wolf here. As you're a person of the 21st century, have you tried to remove 21st century bias from the voice of the book? or have you tried to give Newland a 15th century voice and outlook?
Well, that's a good question, but you know, you can't do either, but you have to do both. Okay, because if I wrote 15th century dialogue, no one would read the bloody book. But if I wrote 21st century dialogue, also no one would read the book, because you can't have somebody going, "Hey, mate, you know, you can't have 21st century slang and colloquialisms."
Yeah,
So,
balance.
you know, I got comments back from some of the editors because I used the word shenanigans, right, in the novel. And then I'm being told, oh, shenanigans is an 18th century word. So I had to take it out. You know, but then, you know, if you want to be authentic, it's a real balance of finding the articulation of some of the phrases. You do it by introducing some of the phrases, but not all of them, because otherwise people won't be able to follow it.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking both of the phraseology, but also perhaps a sort of you know, I happen to be reading a book at the moment about how the attitude to violence has changed over the course of human history.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
And I think that, you know, clearly the period that you're landing in is a much more violent period of history, just because the world has been pacified in some sense over the centuries. And it's just, you could say the same thing about misogynism or understanding of spiritualism or religion, etc. That there was definitely a different view on these things, and I could imagine there's also a balance to be struck. We it would be difficult to put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who lived 500 years ago.
Yeah,
but at the same time trying to.
Yeah, it is, and I think what I strive to do is not to understand how they thought, but I try to appreciate how they thought, which is different. And I think that's the best you can do. You know, you're on the journey of trying to understand, but I don't think we ever will, without becoming one of them and living like one of them and dressing like one of them, which I unfortunately haven't got time to do.
Oh, another question from Jenny Minot here. What drives you to write?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this to you, Debbie, that there's a whole raft of questions that we could explore at some point, and I think one of them is, what is writing? Because I don't think writing is currently understood. You look at a dictionary and it says writing is the process of writing, or something ridiculous like that. So clearly they don't understand what it is, and I don't fully understand what it is. But I know that I get great satisfaction from some of the passages of writing that come through me. And, you know, I think these notions of the muse and of some sort of separate entity that talks to you, guides you, speaks to you, I think has some sort of relevance, but maybe we just need to update the terminology. But there does seem to be some, you know, we talk about an author's voice, don't we? But the character's voice, and characters do have a voice. So where does that voice come from? Does it come? It's got to come through the author. So does the author become the person for that moment? And I suppose in some ways they do. And I suppose, you know, it's fascinating to see all the many different lives that you can become.
I think Jenny's followed that up with a good comment saying, so are you a storyteller then? And so it's more about telling the story than writing. Writing is the physical way that you
yeah, I suppose there is a difference. Yeah,
it's weaving the story.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, I think, you know, I think of myself as the first reader of what I write. So I'm kind of exploring these realms for myself, trying to make sense of the world we live in today by seeing where they started and where they originated, what started. And I think I've said, I kind of, as I've written more, I understand more of what I'm trying to do in writing about history, because a historian can tell you what happened, but a novelist can explore why it happened and how it happened. Yeah, and that's what I do. It's just fascinating. It's absolutely
fun.
Because you can speculate. So you can argue I write speculative fiction. So, but then to some degree, don't historians write speculative fiction? How much of what a historian writes is fictional, and how much do they actually know?
Yeah,
they weren't there.
no,
They're only relying on somebody else's book, who maybe was there, but yeah, they probably relying on somebody else's book who wasn't there.
Yes,
True, but you could argue that their aim is a little different. But
yeah, that's true. So that's how I think about it. That's how I currently think about it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Are there any more questions from anybody? It's been a very interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
We're in a struggle in the world today between slipping back into barbarism and trying to advance civilization. And it strikes me that all these historical novels intrinsically have that theme in them anyway, but it allows a second look to see if there's something, because it's a different kind of struggle in those times, and there's probably themes of civilization and humanity that haven't developed, but were possibly going to develop or trying to develop in those times, such as honor and such as the building of character, and a lot of things that have been damaged and destroyed in the world. And it just really strikes me that it's an excellent opportunity to try and get some perception about that, and what may be bubbling away in your mind about the lessons of that time and things that may be able to be rescued from that time.
Well, yeah, an extraordinary question and considerations in what you're saying, because there's all those features to be one, to explore and to understand. The things that were stopped then, that need to be released and brought forward. Like you say, we might think we live in a civilized world today, but if that was the case, how come there's still war? I mean, in the second novel I wrote a lot about Francis Walsingham, who was a spy master. And see, one of the things I realized I want to do is to try and get underneath the history of different periods and question the assumptions that we make. And one of the things I realized, because of course Francis Walsingham was a spy master, he had a spy network, a network of spies, and one of the first in England to do so. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, why are we even living in any civilization that needs spies? Haven't we developed to a point where we don't need to spy on each other anymore? But clearly we haven't. So I look back at the history of spies, and as far as Wikipedia told me, it goes back to like China in 2000 BC. I mean, for God's sake, they were spying on each other 4,000 years ago. Yeah, and we think we've advanced. If we'd have advanced, we wouldn't be spying.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need to. There would be a basis of trust that was endemic to the species, but there's not. And that's the sort of barbarism, the retreat from barbarism that you're referring to. And it is a struggle even today. One of the other examples I give to folks to make this a stark comparison, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? There's Old Testament stuff. Conquest, war, famine, and disease. Okay, if we were civilized, we'd have got rid of them all by now, and we haven't got rid of any of them. In fact, you could argue it's got worse. There you go. But you talk about making comparison, and there's a comparison. So.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting a picture. It's almost like history has been a constant kind of attempt to, almost like a battering ram of trying to get into a future that keeps resisting us. Because in ancient Greece, you've got people like Lucretius who had incredible observations. Like you were talking in your extract about the observations and how the mind of the person was working on what these things meant. And you see that in Lucretius, in the nature of things in ancient Greece, and incredible abilities of the mind. And yet, as you say, what is it? What is this resistance that somehow we can't convert this incredible capability into civilization? This is really weird, actually. It's, because it isn't a straight line. It's strange with all the acumen that it doesn't convert. That is a really strange thing.
I mean, it's like, was it Mahatma Gandhi was asked, what does he think about Western civilization?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
What civilization? Yeah. Unfortunately, I have to leave.
Jens, thank you very much for joining.
Very fascinating. I think that on the last subject here as well, if you're too despondent about what's happening in the world, at least one I take is that we might not have become civilized, but we become more civilized over time. A bigger part of us is doing something right. If you go back in 500 years ago, people would still kill each other for small offenses, and I know we still do that today, but less and less so, I guess. Anyways, it's been fascinating.
Thanks for joining.
Just want to say thank you.
Cheers, Jens. Bye.
There's just one. Should we finish then with the final question from Jenny? On a more positive note, how many more novels are bubbling up in you?
Well,
Justin,
I've got one more I'm editing called The Midnight of Eight, the second one in the series of this. But the one I am wanting to write after that is called, or working title is called The Spirit of the Times, or rather The Spirit of These Times. But I don't know, I haven't found a setting for it yet. And I suppose I've got other distractions and things to explore, but that's what I'd love to write, is to explore, I don't know how to put it in fictional terms, the spirit of these times, which of course, for us, we live in these times. These are our times. We breathe them every day. And yet, how do we become part of that spirit? I suppose that's the questions I would want to explore in the novel. But I don't know what the setting is. I don't know. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking of doing.
Great, that sounds fascinating. So if there's no more questions, just wanted to say that if anybody would like to hear more from Justin on Saturday, and they happen to be up in the Cotswolds, I'm hosting the next Hawkesbury Upton Literature Festival talk on Saturday afternoon about research and inspiration, the stories behind stories. There'll be, I think Justin's already sent you a link to tickets for that. I appreciate, Mary, you're over in New York, probably a little bit far for you to come. And Helen is coming.
A little far.
But there's clearly a lot more conversation to be had around this book and Justin's other books. And I recommend The Mark of the Salamander to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for joining, guys, and thank you for your questions and interest. And I said to Debbie at the beginning, it's nothing like a hard sell. This is not about buying the book. Please buy it if you want to. If you don't want to, it's easy. I just wanted to have an hour space to share with you guys to celebrate writing, books, and history, have a natter about stuff and see old friends, and so thank you very much for joining. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Are we
you.
saying
Bye.
goodbye now?
Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye from New
Bye,
York.
everybody.
Bye. Sick.
Bye from Wales.
Bye. Bye.
Hmm.